They called her the broken dove of Highgarden. Lady Alara had once been the province's most radiant jewel, her laughter like wind chimes in the castle's stone corridors, her grace on horseback a thing of poetry. But glory is a fragile vessel, and hers had been shattered. A fall, a misstep of her trusted mare on a rain-slicked path, had stolen the life from her legs, leaving her bound to a wheeled chair, a beautiful, porcelain doll laid upon a shelf. In the eyes of her brother, Lord Valerius, she was no longer a jewel but a stain. A living monument to imperfection, an unsaleable asset in the cold calculus of political marriage. His ambition was a frost that withered all familial warmth, and Alara was a flower caught in its killing grip. The day of her final degradation was cruelly bright, the sun spilling over the parapets with an indifference that felt like a personal mockery. Valerius had her brought to the main gate, her finery a cruel joke against the grim finality of the act. He stood before the assembled household staff and a handful of jeering vassals, his voice a blade of polished steel. He spoke of burdens, of the purity of their line, of the regrettable necessity of excising a weakness from the heart of the family. He did not look at her, not once. Instead, he looked at his audience, performing his cold-hearted duty for their benefit. She was an object, a lesson. He declared her disowned, stripped of title and name, a ghost to be forgotten. And then, with a flick of his wrist, 2 guards lifted her from her chair and carried her, like a sack of unwanted grain, beyond the castle walls, depositing her on the dusty verge of the King's Road. The great oak doors boomed shut, the sound a final, deafening period on the sentence of her life. The dust settled around her in a fine, choking powder. The sun beat down, turning the silk of her gown into a suffocating shroud. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the slow, merciless crawl of the sun across the sky. Carriages rumbled past, their occupants averting their eyes from the wretched spectacle of a noblewoman in the dirt. Shame was a contagion they dared not catch. Despair, a thick and tar-like substance, began to fill the hollow spaces inside her. Her paralysis had stolen her movement, but her brother had stolen her worth. She was nothing. A discarded thing. As twilight began to bleed purple and orange into the sky, a new sound cut through the drone of crickets, a sound of profound and desperate misery. It was the wail of an infant. Slowly, a figure emerged from the deepening gloom, a man walking with the heavy, weary gait of one who has journeyed too far. He was broad of shoulder, his clothes simple and worn, but he carried himself with a straight-backed dignity that belied his humble appearance. In his arms, swaddled in a rough-spun blanket, was the source of the crying, a tiny baby, its face red and contorted with hunger. He stopped a few feet from her, his eyes, shadowed with exhaustion and grief, taking in her strange predicament. He saw the fine dress, the useless legs, the haunted despair in her gaze. He was a man steeped in his own tragedy, too weary for judgment. His name was Kalen, a blacksmith whose world had been incinerated by loss. His wife, his gentle Lyra, had perished in the fire of childbirth just a week prior, leaving him with this tiny, fragile life and a heart cleaved in two. He had been walking since, leaving behind the home that was now just a mausoleum of memory, seeking, he wasn't even sure what. But now, all that mattered was the screaming hunger of his daughter. He looked at Alara, a woman of obvious high birth, and in a voice raw with desperation, he spoke words he never imagined he would utter to a stranger, let alone a lady. "Forgive me," he began, his voice cracking. My daughter. She has not eaten. Her mother is gone. I have nothing for her. Is there anything? Can you help?" The request was absurd. She was a cripple, abandoned and worthless. What help could she offer? Yet, as she looked at the squirming bundle, at the tiny, frantic mouth, a strange and forgotten instinct stirred within her. A profound, biological memory. Before her accident, she had been betrothed. She had dreamed of children. And in the wake of the fall, a different, more private tragedy had unfolded, a miscarriage, a small life lost in the chaos of her broken body. Her body, in its cruel wisdom, had prepared for a child that never came. A strange calm settled over her. This was a purpose. Not a grand purpose, not the ruling of a household or the forging of an alliance, but something more fundamental, more real. I can, she whispered, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. I can help her. Kaelin stared, bewildered, not understanding. Elara simply gestured to herself with a trembling hand. My body, it is prepared for a child that I lost. The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge of shared sorrow. Understanding dawned in Kaelin's eyes, quickly followed by a wave of humbling gratitude that washed away his pride. He knelt before her, carefully placing his daughter, his Elia, into her arms. The weight of the child was a shock, so light, yet so substantial. As Elia's desperate cries found their reward, a profound silence descended, broken only by the soft sounds of nursing and the evening breeze. In that moment, on the side of a dusty road, a disgraced noblewoman and a grieving blacksmith forged an unspoken pact. He had a child who needed a mother's sustenance. She had a life that needed a reason to continue. He gently lifted her, his arms strong and sure, and carried her to his small, two-wheeled cart. He placed her amidst the sacks and his few belongings, making a nest for her and the baby. As he pulled the cart back onto the road, moving away from the dark silhouette of Highgarden, Elara felt not the shame of her exile, but the first, terrifying glimmer of a new beginning. The world had cast her out as worthless, but here, in the arms of a stranger, she was giving life. Their journey was a silent one at first, a rhythm of shared duty. By day, Kaelin pulled the cart, his powerful muscles straining, his gaze fixed on the horizon. By night, he would build a small fire, and Elara would nurse the now peaceful Elia, her small heart beating steadily against her own. He treated her with a reverence that stunned her. He never alluded to her legs, but would lift her from the cart as if she were made of spun glass, ensuring she was comfortable before seeing to his own needs. He brought her water, shared his meager rations of bread and cheese, and wrapped her in his own cloak when the nights grew cold. This quiet, unassuming kindness was more valuable than any jewel she had ever owned. It was a respect paid not to her former title, but to her present self, to the woman who was saving his child. He saw her not as a broken doll, but as a savior. One evening, beneath a canopy of stars so bright they seemed to hum, the silence finally broke. It was Elara who spoke first, her voice soft. Her name is Elia, Kaelin answered, his gaze lost in the fire. For her mother. Lyra, he then told her everything. He spoke of his forge, of the scent of hot metal and cold dust that had been his life's perfume. He spoke of Lyra, of her laughter that could coax flowers from stone, of the home they had built with their own hands. He spoke of the birth, the joy turning to terror, the midwife's helpless face, the silence that followed the baby's first cry. His grief was a raw, physical thing, a landscape he had been wandering through alone. As he spoke, Elara felt the walls around her own heart begin to crumble. His pain made a space for her own. She told him of her life before, of the expectations and the gilded cage. And she told him of the accident, not as a source of shame, but simply as a fact, a moment when one life ended and another, this strange new one, began. They were two solitary islands of sorrow, but in sharing their stories, they built a bridge. The world had broken them both in different ways, branding them with loss. But here, in the flickering firelight, with a sleeping child breathing softly between them, they were no longer entirely alone. They traveled for another week, a fragile, nascent family forged on the road. A storm broke one night, a furious, biblical tempest that tore at the sky. Kaelin managed to drag the cart beneath a thick grove of ancient oaks, the canopy offering meager shelter. Rain lashed down, soaking them in minutes. Shivering, huddled together for warmth beneath a single oilcloth, the world was reduced to the sound of thunder and the scent of wet earth. Elia, startled, began to cry. In the close, dark space, Kaelin shifted to comfort his daughter, his arm brushing against Elara's. It was an accidental touch, skin on skin, but a jolt of heat, sharp and unexpected, passed between them. It was not a spark of lust, but of something deeper, a profound recognition of presence, of shared vulnerability. He did not pull away. In the darkness, their hands found each other, a silent anchor in the raging storm. They said nothing, but a new language was being born between them, one of gentle touches, of shared glances over the baby's head, of a comfortable silence that spoke more than words ever could. The storm passed, but something within their small, sheltered world had been irrevocably altered. They finally arrived in the town of Oakhaven, a bustling community nestled in a river valley. It was a place of opportunity, with a need for a good blacksmith. Kalen found a derelict forge at the edge of town, its hearth cold for years, and struck a deal with the town reeve to lease it. With what little coin he had, he bought supplies and set to work. The clang of his hammer on the anvil became a new heartbeat for their life. Ilara, from a chair Kalen had fashioned for her, watched him work. She had never witnessed such creation, the brute force and delicate skill required to bend iron to his will. And she, in turn, found a new role. With her sharp mind and noble education, she managed their meager finances, bartering shrewdly for supplies, keeping their accounts with a precision that amazed the local merchants. She was the mind, he the muscle, and together, they began to build a life. Elia thrived, growing chubby and curious, her gurgles and first smiles the sun around which their days revolved. For a time, it seemed they had found a sanctuary. But the world has long arms. A traveling merchant, one who had done business with her family, recognized Ilara. The story spread like a contagion through Oakhaven, the disgraced lady of Highgarden, living in sin with a common smith. Whispers followed them in the market. Doors that had been open were now closed. Commissions for Kalen's work dried up, the townsfolk suddenly wary of the taint of scandal. The community that had seemed a haven became a cage of judgment. The pressure mounted, a slow, crushing weight. And then, the architect of her fall arrived. Lord Valerius rode into Oakhaven on a steed as black as his heart, flanked by 2 armed guards. He had heard the rumors and could not abide this final, galling insult, that his discarded sister had not simply faded into wretched obscurity, but had found some semblance of a new life. He found them at the forge, a place of sweat and soot that, to his eyes, was the very definition of squalor. He dismounted, his fine leather boots stirring the dust. He ignored Kalen completely, his cold eyes fixing on Ilara. So, he sneered, his voice dripping with aristocratic contempt. The fallen dove has found a new perch in the mud. I find your lack of shame almost impressive. Kalen stepped forward, his body a protective shield in front of Ilara, his hands clenched into fists that could shatter stone. You will not speak to her that way, he said, his voice a low growl. Valerius laughed, a short, ugly sound. And who are you to tell me what I will and will not do? A peasant playing house with my refuse, he gestured to his guards. I am here to correct this embarrassment. She is a stain upon my name, and I will see her properly disposed of, where she can trouble no one again. He intended to have her locked away in some remote convent, a prisoner for life. But something inside Ilara, something forged in kindness and tempered by love, refused to break. For the first time since her fall, she found her voice, not the whispered, hesitant thing it had become, but the clear, ringing tone of a noblewoman. You have no power here, brother, she said, her chin high. You cast me out. I am no longer of your house or your name. I am my own woman. Valerius was taken aback by her defiance. His face twisted into a mask of rage. You are nothing without me, he spat. And I will ruin this blacksmith. I will see to it that he never lifts a hammer in this province again. You will come crawling back to me. He stormed away, leaving the threat hanging in the air like poison smoke. His persecution was swift and ruthless. He used his influence to lean on the guilds, the suppliers, the merchants. Kalen was blacklisted. No one would sell him coal or iron. No one would buy his wares. They were isolated, their small savings dwindling to nothing. The specter of starvation, once a distant fear, became a daily presence. One evening, as the last of their firewood burned low, the despair was a palpable thing in the small room. Calon sat with his head in his hands, defeated. "He has won," he whispered. "I cannot provide for you. I have failed you both." Elara reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "No," she said, her voice fierce. "He has not won. We have each other." He looked up, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. In that moment of shared ruin, the truth that had been growing between them finally blossomed into words. "I love you, Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you more than I thought I could ever love again." Tears streamed down her face, tears not of sorrow, but of a profound, heartbreaking joy. "And I love you, Calon," she confessed. "You and Elia, you are my home." Their love was no longer a quiet, unspoken thing. It was a declaration of war against the world that sought to crush them. In that moment of confession, desperation gave way to resolve. Her brother fought with power and coin, but Elara had been trained in a different kind of warfare, the intricate dance of law, politics, and history. While Valerius saw her education as an ornament, she now saw it as a weapon. For days, she sat with scrolls and books borrowed from the town's small parish, her brow furrowed in concentration. She questioned Calon about the town's founding, its charter, its traditional land rights. And there, buried in the dusty legalese of Oakhaven's founding charter, granted by a king 3 centuries prior, she found it. A clause. A provision meant to protect the town's common folk from predatory lords, stating that any land left fallow or abandoned for more than 7 years would revert to the stewardship of the town commons, to be granted to any citizen who could make it productive. Valerius, in his arrogance, had been buying up failed farms and lands around Oakhaven, letting them lie fallow while he strangled the town's economy, intending to consolidate them into a single vast estate. Many of these properties had been derelict for far longer than 7 years. Her plan was audacious. It was a rebellion fought not with swords, but with ink and parchment. First, they needed an ally. They went to Father Michael, the town priest, a man who had been watching them with discerning eyes. He had seen Calon's honor and Elara's quiet dignity. He had baptized Elia and seen the love that bound their small family. When Elara laid out the legal charter and explained Valerius's scheme, the priest's kind face hardened with righteous anger. He had seen his flock suffer under Valerius's economic siege. He agreed to help. He would call a public town meeting, a forum where, by the same ancient charter, any citizen could petition the Reeve and the Council of Elders. The stage was set for a final confrontation. It would not be a battle of might, but of wits and truth. The town hall was packed. Valerius was there, summoned by the Reeve, looking bored and irritated by the presumptuousness of the common folk. He believed this was some pathetic appeal for mercy. He was wrong. Calon stood before the council, not as a beggar, but as a citizen. But it was Elara, brought to the front by Father Michael, who spoke. Her voice, clear and steady, filled the hall. She did not speak of personal grievances or family betrayals. She spoke of the law. She quoted the charter, chapter and verse. She presented maps, painstakingly drawn, showing the lands Valerius had acquired and left to rot. She presented dates, tax records, and deeds, all the evidence gathered with the priest's help. She laid bare his plan not as a personal attack, but as a crime against the entire community. He was not just strangling one blacksmith, he was strangling Oakhaven itself. The townspeople murmured, then shouted, as they realized the extent of the injustice. Valerius's face went from bored to livid. He blustered and threatened, but Elara calmly dismantled his every argument with cold, hard facts. He was a tyrant caught in a net of his own making, exposed not by a sword, but by the educated mind of the woman he had discarded as worthless. The Reeve, a man of the people, had no choice. The law was the law. The council voted unanimously. Valerius's illegally held lands were forfeit. The defeat was absolute. Valerius was not imprisoned or exiled, he was something far worse in his own eyes, diminished. He was a laughingstock, his power broken by a cripple and a blacksmith. He left Oakhaven a smaller man than when he arrived, his pride in tatters. For Alara and Kaelin, the victory was quiet but total. They did not seek power or wealth. The forfeited lands were redistributed among the townspeople, and Oakhaven began to breathe again. Kaelin's forge roared back to life, his hammer ringing with the sound of freedom and purpose. Their home, once a symbol of their persecution, became a sanctuary of their earned happiness. They were married by Father Michael in a simple ceremony in the autumn sunshine, surrounded by the grateful citizens of Oakhaven. Their new kingdom was not a castle of cold stone, but a small cottage filled with the scent of baking bread and the warmth of a loving hearth. True nobility, Alara had learned, was not a matter of blood or title, but of the spirit. It was the honor of a man who works with his hands, the courage of a woman who finds strength in her scars, and the fierce, unconditional love that builds a family from the ashes of loss. One afternoon, as she sat holding Elia, and Kaelin stood beside them, his hand resting on her shoulder, the little girl looked up, her bright eyes moving from one face to the other. She reached out one tiny hand to Kaelin's rough fingers, and another to Alara's cheek. And then, she spoke her first word, a sound that was not Papa, nor was it Mama, but something that held them both. Home, she said, her voice a perfect, tiny bell. In that single word, their broken pasts were healed, and their future, a tapestry woven with threads of resilience and love, stretched out before them, bright and boundless. True worth is not bestowed by status or circumstance, it is forged in the heart, proven through kindness, and found in the simple, profound act of loving and being loved in return.